Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this edition of NCSA Live. I am your host, Danny Koenig, Director of Regional Recruiting, joined today by Philip Wells. Phil, how are you?
Doing extremely well, Danny, and again, happy to be here another week. It's really just educating the people on a lot of the recruiting updates. And again, my name is Phil Wells. I'm one of the recruiting managers here at NCSA. Pleasure to be here.
Phil, we got a lot to cover today. I am excited about this because we're going to dive into the nuts and bolts on how college coaches recruit. So again, we're still in industry secrets. How do college coaches recruit athletes? When does the college recruiting process begin? That's a huge question that we get a lot. What are the college recruiting processes that college coaches follow? And what is the college coach recruiting timeline that athletes should follow? So we're going to give you guys some tips on how to get ahead of that. Of course, we're going to do some Q&A towards the end, so drop those questions in the comment box here. We'd love to get to those towards the end of the show. Do want to acknowledge that we are live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube today. So, Phil, let's dive into this here. Let's talk about when does the college recruiting process begin? So, I think first and foremost, we have to talk a little bit about the recruiting timeline. So, you deal with this every day. You have these conversations every day with families, and just fill us in a little bit. What are we talking about when we talk about the college recruiting timeline?
Yeah, absolutely. Danny, it's definitely a frequent topic, a frequent question. Everybody wonders about it when it comes to joining a recruiting process. And really just to preface it with, the recruiting timeline, first and foremost, most sports out there, especially those in your Division I and Division II levels, they actually can't, in terms of their coaches, they can't reach out to you proactively until June 15th after sophomore year or September 1st of your junior year. So again, that's a couple years after you're actually getting into high school. But the recruiting process does start far before that. Now, again, most college programs and coaches can't reach out to that second or third year in high school. But as far as the recruiting efforts go, from that student athlete, you can always get ahead of the game, and there's never an early status when it comes to potentially getting your recruiting video up to date. Having online video where college coaches can start evaluating very early. Doing things like maintaining really good grades to make sure college coaches can keep a pulse on really what you're doing in the classroom. Those are things that you want to start with as soon as, freshman year of high school. Okay, and we'll talk about that a little bit further, but although college coaches can't really reach out to you proactively until, sophomore year at the end of it, until junior year, student athletes, you still need to really much take proactive recruiting steps, as early as 8th grade and most times freshman year. And as we look at the flip side of that and really branch into the college coaches side of things, yeah, they can't reach out into that third or, maybe sometimes fourth year, but Danny, you're a former college coach. A lot of times these college coaches are getting ahead of it far before, again, that second or third year in terms of evaluating and prospecting. Talk about that a little bit in terms of that lens of the recruiting process through a coach's eyes.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's absolutely true. You say that most coaches are going to be starting the recruiting process well in advance of the contact period. That is absolutely true. And, when we talk about restrictions, NCAA rules and restrictions on when that coach can actually reach out, whether it's after your sophomore year into your junior year, that is not when recruiting actually starts. And that's a big distinction that a lot of families need to know, that just because college coaches cannot reach out to you, it doesn't mean they're not recruiting your graduating class. So let's give some examples. As a former Division I coach, as a recruiting coordinator, someone that was responsible for managing the recruitment of athletes at those Division I programs. First and foremost, I'm gathering a list. I know what my school is about. I know what the selling points of that academic institution are. I know what my program is about. I know what my philosophy is as a coach. I am identifying and evaluating prospects that are going to fit that criteria, right? So number one is just, gathering that list of who am I initially interested in. And that, a lot of times for me, was going to happen at least a year in advance of the contact period, right? So if you take June 15th after your high school sophomore year, I was probably building that list in that athlete's freshman year or towards the end of their freshman year. So I needed a legitimate outlet to be able to identify and evaluate prospects. I needed to evaluate their grades, maybe learn a little bit more about what their interests were, take a look at their video. In a lot of cases for these high school athletes, that was happening in the end of their freshman year, the summer going into their sophomore year, and certainly by the time they were in sophomore year, that first semester was huge for me as a Division I recruiting coordinator. So just, again, figuring out who those athletes are going to be. And then, I'm starting to make some light contact as it was permissible by the NCAA. So I would send out a questionnaire. Please enter your information into my recruiting database so I know that you're interested and I, as the coach, can track my communications with you. Camp invites. That's another big one that a lot of athletes are going to see in many sports, is just that coach running a camp or clinic over the summer in which they can invite you to that camp or clinic and see what you're capable of doing on the pitch, on the field, in the pool, whatever it might be. So that's going to be a big part of it, or just sending out generic information about that school, pamphlets and brochures that the admissions department was putting out for any prospective student. I could send that to a student athlete to get them interested in my school. Next step is really just conducting evaluations. So kind of going through that list and saying, look, these athletes are going to be top scorers for us. They are going to be productive at the conference level and potentially the national level. These are our priority athletes. Maybe making a tiered list of when we want to communicate our interest to those athletes and where we want to focus our attention and who's going to be most important for us in that grad class. Eventually, as we start to get into the contact period, these coaches are going to extend verbal offers. They're going to extend scholarship offers. They're going to extend offers to come to campus with that school, the athletic department, that program is going to actually pay for that athlete to be there. With the Division I levels, you get 5 official visits where that coach is going to pay for you to be on that campus and have a good experience. And then, of course, later down in the line, later in junior year, and then certainly senior year, you are going to be signing the national letter of intent, meaning that you're claiming that scholarship and you're going to be at that school for at least a year. So, Phil, to your point, we talked a lot about those recruiting deadlines or timelines on which coaches can actually have communication. But you and I both know that communication or that process is going to start well in advance of the communication period.
Yeah, absolutely. And one interesting factor there, amongst college coaches getting a head start on a lot of that stuff. Again, we look back at the role of the student athlete, and that's one thing, Danny, we say all the time, it's a set amount of work that needs to be done in the recruiting process spread over 4 years. And first off, as it pertains to what college coaches are doing, when we look at, a year-by-year basis of, what student athletes should be doing, I think it's safe to break it down, starting with the freshmen. It's calculated steps every single year that you want to be taking in the recruiting process. And just let's talk a little bit about freshmen and really their role in the process. And when we say get a head start as a student athlete, doesn't necessarily mean, start calling college coaches and start sending off, emails and tons of video to every college coach out there, because that's not necessarily what you want to do as a freshman. Well, you can. Okay, but some of the really specific things that really can get you ahead of the game if you can partake in some of these steps here as a freshman. Number one is research. Okay, research to different colleges out there, research to different programs out there. Make sure you research the different division levels out there. Why? Okay, if you're a freshman and you're embarking into the recruiting process, you have a goal of playing in college. You need to know how aggressive each division level is when it comes to how athletic the requirements are. You want to know the academic requirements. You want to know, how good you need to be at a certain program, frankly. Okay, and really, if you can know that as a freshman, now you can craft yourself into that individual athlete that a Division I program may be looking for, or maybe that's a Division II or Division III. But we got to know that ahead of the game, ahead of time. Step number 2, okay, we got to start compiling video at this point, if we have it. Okay, we got to start compiling video so college coaches who are getting ahead of the game and who are prospecting and who are starting to evaluate, they can take a look. Okay, they can take a look. And you want to house that somewhere online where college coaches with ease, although they can't proactively reach out as a freshman, you want to house everything where they can, collectively look at video, look at grades, look at everything you have as a student athlete thus far in one spot. Okay, so with that being said, as a freshman, start your NCSA recruiting profile. Start your online presence with your profile so college coaches all over can have very quick access to all of your recruiting material at the click of a button, at the search of a website without ever leaving their desk. Okay, and if we move on up that ladder a little bit, again, it does get a little bit more in depth as a sophomore. Okay, it starts in a lot of ways with keeping that profile up to date, but then talk a little bit about, maybe sophomores and some of the things that they can look forward to as, they can get a little bit more hands-on potentially with college coaches.
Yeah, I would say generally you need to be doing something intentionally in the recruiting process as a sophomore. That is not out of bounds. That is not too early. Again, for me as a former recruiting coordinator and a Division I coach, I was actively pursuing and building prospect lists with the sophomore class. So like Phil said, freshman year is about research, about understanding division levels and what's available to you, starting to build that profile, but you need to start taking action in your sophomore year, even if you're looking at a Division III level, an NAI level, because quite frankly, those coaches can have conversations with you over the phone, exchange emails, right? When we talk about those restrictive communication dates, that only applies to NCAA Division I and NCAA Division II. So if you're aiming for Division III programs, NAIAs, maybe thinking about junior college, you can actually have communication with those coaches in your freshman and sophomore year. So possibly that's a strategy to become familiar with that process. Maybe you are aiming for a Division I, Division II level, can't have that communication with coach yet, but maybe get familiar with conversations with coaches at the Division III level in your sophomore year. So, starting to build a target list is going to be number one. And, that's the list in which you are going to be proactive and raise your hand and say, Coach, I've done my research. I know what programs are good for me. You're in a region that I want to be in. Your school offers a major that I want to study. And there's nothing preventing you from communicating your interest to college coaches at any time. Right. So even if you are thinking Division I, Division II, those coaches can't get back to you until after your sophomore year. There's nothing preventing you from letting those coaches know that you are interested in their program. So you have this target list, ideally 30 to 40 schools that, meet your criteria and the ones that you want to actively pursue. You got to let those coaches know, fill out a questionnaire. Say, Coach, I know about your program. I know the steps. I need to be in your recruiting database. So when you can have those conversations with me, my information is right there. Again, video is going to be essential. So as you start to take steps forward in your athletic endeavors, you need to start compiling video. For some sports, that's going to be in-game highlight footage, meaning that if you're that sport, take soccer, for instance, you're going to be want to film 90 minutes of game because you don't know when your best stuff is going to come out. And then when you have a particularly good play, a good pass, you can cut that up and add that to your highlight tape. So again, starting to think forward about the process and not be reactionary about this when you get to your junior year. That's what your sophomore year is all about. And I promise you, if you're thinking scholarship, those coaches are absolutely paying attention to your grad class as a high school sophomore, sometimes as early as freshman year or the summer before your sophomore year. So sophomore year is going to be a big one just for taking proactive steps forward and kind of laying that baseline intentionally. Phil, you and I both know that junior year, it's game on, right? All bets are off, open communication. It is an explosion of communication between coaches and prospective student athletes. Talk a little bit about what athletes can expect in their junior year of high school.
Absolutely, Danny. And I love how you preface that, because the way you want to look at the timeline, guys, as a freshman, we're getting our feet wet. We're starting to research. We're getting familiar with things we need to do down the line. Sophomore, this is the time to really start laying a framework, really start throwing those, eggs out there so they can be hatched. And as a junior, again, as Danny prefaced, this go time. This is that time period really starting in the summertime, June 15th after sophomore year, as you head into junior year. This is when that hard work starts to pay off. This is when college coaches can start responding. This is when they can start being proactive. And this is when you may not have to wonder if that coach got that email or not. This is when they can actually very much voice their opinion about what they see out of you as a prospect. So with that being said, as a student athlete, this is that time period where, first and foremost, that target list, it needs to be compiled. Okay, if we don't have a full target list compiled as a junior, that's step number one. We have to be familiar at this point with the division levels we potentially want to land at. We want to be very much comfortable and sharp on, very much different individual schools that we want to target at this point if we haven't already targeted. Okay, and with that, once we have a very good, realistic, and comfortable list, we got to start, reaching out to college coaches even more aggressively than we were, prior to junior year. Okay, and that comes along the lines of, emails. Okay, that comes along the lines of, questionnaires in terms of getting them in just to the athletic departments, but emails, phone calls, okay, lines of social media. We want to really exhaust all avenues to reach out to college coaches, because this is a time, again, that they can respond. Okay, they can tell me, hey, am I a prospect on your list, or, are you maybe looking elsewhere? Do you have room for my position, or is that roster spot already closed? This is a time where college coaches can start interacting the most. So we want to make sure we're very proactive in targeting coaches directly. And frankly, as a junior, this is a time where we see a lot of scholarships actually starting to be given out, starting to get handed out, and most frequently from your Division I programs. Okay, a lot of those schools like to get those scholarships out early. Okay, and as you become a senior, and then you could talk about this a little bit from the eyes of a college coach. As you become a senior, things are going to become a little bit more scarce, and you may want to, open up your targets a little bit. And then they talk a little bit about, the lens of a college coach and what really student athletes should be thinking, if it's senior year.
Yep. So senior year, my goal was to get those athletes on campus. So again, we come back to junior year, contact period opens up for your scholarship offering coaches, and I want to get you on the horn. I want to ask you some questions. Hopefully you have some questions for me, but my end result, if I gather that you're interested, is I'm trying to get you on a visit. I want to get you on campus. I want to have you attend class, meet with some people on the academic side. I want you to hang out with the team and make sure you're comfortable there. Maybe see a practice, see a game, those sorts of things. So, that can happen in your junior year. I was mostly targeting that for early in the senior year in advance of the national signing period, right? When you're signing national letter of intent to commit to that school and potentially earn some scholarship. But quite frankly, as when I look at the senior class as a Division I coach and a recruiting coordinator, I'm starting to wrap up with those athletes in the senior year. So we have our official visit dates. There's maybe 4 in the fall. I'm communicating that as soon as, my top prospects, as soon as I can communicate with them, in their junior year, right after their sophomore year, I'm saying, these are our dates. We have 32 openings across 4 weekends. Can you make one of these weekends? Now, when those weekends are actually happening in that athlete's senior year, that's kind of the final steps, right? That's when it's like, hey, you need to make a decision if this is going to, be on your list, if you're going to sign a scholarship. That signing period for an athlete, a high school athlete in their senior year, is going to typically happen in November onward, but I'm setting myself up in advance of that. So that's when an athlete can experience in their senior year, early on in their senior years, to actually take those official visits, commit to those 5 that are offered to them through the NCAA, those official visits that those schools are going to pay for. But quite frankly, as a coach, I'm still very, very focused on the junior class. I'm starting to move on and have conversations with those kids in those classes, and learn more about them and start to build relationships, go through that process. So really the bulk of the work for me as a coach was focused on the junior class, because I don't want to fall behind that way. Once an athlete hits their senior year, it's basically like, take your visits and decide if you're going to sign and be a part of my program. So in some respects, Phil, that senior year, we talk about it being a victory lap. The only athletes that can afford that to be a victory lap are the ones that got this process started in their freshman year, right? So set amount of work, whether you start that 8th grade or freshman year, doesn't matter. You still got to do that amount of work. If that happens in your junior year, senior year, and you start that, right, you're going to be scrambling a little bit more than the athlete that had communicated that interest early on in their career.
Absolutely. And the last point to note there amongst that senior year, whether you are taking that victory lap and, you got things started early, use it as a celebration. But if you are that athlete that may be still looking for a scholarship or still looking for a roster spot, and, you look up, maybe you got a later start, maybe you didn't. But, if you look up in it's senior year and, you're still wondering what's out there and what steps can you take, and you still want to play in college and you just don't have it lined up just yet, now's the time as a senior, not only to just, very much be open and start reaching out to coaches more aggressive than ever, but you want to actually start making sure you can find out who has a roster spot. Okay, you want to start finding out, hey, if I was only targeting Division I schools before, now I need to look at Division II. If it was only Division II before, now it needs to be Division III or maybe some JUCO programs to get our foot in the door. We need to be open to all avenues as a senior. The biggest component to note is that all hope is not lost. Tons of spots may be out there, but tons of spots are also filled. So you want to have a more targeted approach while being extremely open as a senior. And again, just note, all hope is not lost, but you may need to be a little bit more open, and that goes academically as well as athletically, just depending on what kind of program you're targeting that would be that best fit school.
All right, cool. We're going to get to some questions here in a second. But again, to summarize, if you're a senior, absolutely still a lot of hope. You got to get on your horse, right? Juniors, you need to be on the horn with coaches at your top schools of interest. And if you're not, something's got to change, right? It's on you to be proactive because those coaches don't know about you. Sophomores, it's around the corner. June 15th is only a couple months away. Those coaches are gearing up to make first contact with their top prospects. You got to get your information in front of those coaches. Freshmen, don't be dumb, right? Make sure that you have this baseline. Start a recruiting profile. Understand the differences in division levels in the contact period so that you don't end up as a senior with nothing going on and scrambling to figure it out. So basically, point being, 13 years old, you are considered recruitably aged by the NCAA, and you want to take advantage of that knowledge, get out ahead of it so you can have a successful recruiting cycle. But interested what the people out there have for us in terms of questions. So let's start to tackle some of this Q&A. This from Suzanne. When do D2 colleges typically make offers? So, Phil, we know that based on NCAA rules, Division II programs can offer in the summer after sophomore year. Now, that actually puts them a little bit ahead of what Division I programs are able to do, where they can't offer athletes, make verbal offers until the end of the summer, right? So D2 actually gets a couple of months ahead of Division I, and you got to believe that they're going to be taking advantage of that. So I would say go on that timeline. Phil, do you feel differently about, how athletes can position themselves?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Danny. Within that, it's going to be between most times junior and senior year. But a lot of D2s like to take advantage of that couple month time period where they can maybe get ahead of the game and steal some of those athletes from those Division I schools. So the point being, start really looking towards that direction right when you start sophomore year so you can get all your T's crossed and be in line for that scholarship ahead of time.
Good question, Suzanne. Appreciate that one. All right, next up here. Phil, you got a graphic? Because I don't. I think Tommy might be typing something out. No, it's all good. Just quick reminder for everybody out there, when we talk about these deadlines and the communication period, Division I currently is still in a dead period until the end of May, right? That is related to COVID. Dead period means that a coach cannot have face-to-face communication that typically surrounds recruiting rules and signing dates. But right now, for all intents and purposes, we're in a dead period, meaning that no Division I coaches can have face-to-face communication with athletes. So just factor that in as well. Here's a question. Any advice for my tryouts? How can I impress coach? Phil, you played at a high level. You played sports for a really long time. I'm sure you got good feedback from your coaches and parents. What are some things that an athlete can do to stand out to a coach?
Yeah. Overall, and we'll speak in theory with it being a little bit vague, but just overall, think about what a college coach, high school coach, club coach, all of them share in theory, what they're looking for out of an athlete. And certainly it's hard work and all the things that make us good athletes, but you want to show something different than those other athletes. Okay. And this is really stepping on that front line between whatever level you're trying out for, whether it be, a college spot, high school spot, or club spot. You want to show something different than other athletes, and that's going to be something different for everybody. That may be a little bit more heart that you can show. That may be in some sports good footwork. That may be, being very coachable. That may be a series of different things. The most stand out without a lot of details amongst the question that you can very much use to impress a coach is listening and being coachable. Take upon advice from a coach, listen to what they're trying to teach, and apply it. If you can be coachable, there's no coach on the planet who won't be impressed.
I cannot echo those sentiments enough. As a former college coach, as someone who's coached at the club level, you are always looking for the athlete that's going to ask questions, that wants to get better, and then actually applies those things. So what we coined that in the industry is coachability, right? Yes, coach is your best phrase. Yes, coach, right? And then actually make the good effort to be able to do that. So these intangibles, it is not necessarily the most talented athlete that's going to get the roster spot, that's going to get the starting position. Every single coach in the country has a spot on their bench, on their roster for the coachable athlete. So hustle, showing up to practice early, right? 110%. I know that gets thrown around a lot, but to the best of your ability all the time, right? And yes, coach, thank you for your time. I appreciate the questions, and have some genuine interest in getting better. I promise you those things are something that I was actively recruiting, because at some point I can do more with the athlete that's coachable than I can with the athlete that's hyper talented. And I would take a whole roster of those athletes that said, yes, coach, and just really wanted to be there, showed up early, hustled, right? So when you talk about trying to make a team, just put yourself out there. Be vulnerable to a degree and take lessons from that coach. They're going to really like you. They're going to like you a lot. They're going to play you. They're going to want to work with you. And then ultimately, you're going to be better off long term, just in terms of what you're going to learn about the sport. Plus, we talk about this, as a 40-year plan. Those kind of metrics or ways of going about the process is going to translate very, very well into being an employable person, right? Employees love former athletes, or employers love former athletes because they have hustle. They're going to listen. They're going to be able to adapt. So that would be my best suggestion. It goes beyond, just good footwork or being excellent at your sport. There's so much that you can learn by just being a coachable student athlete. All right, from James, is there any real benefit to going to showcase camps? Really good question, James. Phil, I'm sure you did a lot of this. I didn't do so much of it as a swimmer. Talk a little bit about the value of showcases.
Absolutely. So super valuable in terms of going to a showcase, getting out there in front of a coach, passing what we call that eyeball test, jumping off the page outside of just what we see digitally. Now, I want to preface this question with, we have to do some homework before showing up to a showcase, before it can be very much impactful, before it can be helpful in the long run. Now, with that being said, we can't typically just show up to a showcase like, tons of athletes do and just hope that we're going to perform the best we ever did and, hope we're going to get a scholarship on the spot, or with that matter, even a college coach reaching out on the spot. We have to do our research ahead of time, meaning we want to typically make sure some coaches know about us before showing up to that showcase. Most showcases, as you coin, have actually their list of coaches that are going to be there. Maybe there's a list of schools that are going to be there. Reach out ahead of time, get some questionnaires in, get some video in. If you can help it in at all possible, you should not be looking to meet a coach for the first time at a showcase. They should already know a little bit about who you are, a little bit about what you're capable of in the classroom, and certainly what you're capable of in your sport. And now, guess what? When you come to that showcase, those coaches there, they're typically going to have a list, maybe about 50 athletes, depending on the size of the showcase. And guess what? Your work before that showcase determines whether you're on that list or not. And if you're not on that list, guess what? The eyes of that coach, they're probably not going to be on you. Okay, now again, there's always that shot that you can just outperform everyone at the showcase and, come off with a heck of a day and some really great interaction. But more times than not, in some cases, Danny, we even call those showcases, $200 t-shirts. If we're not doing the work ahead of time, we're leaving a t-shirt, maybe with a t-shirt, maybe a water bottle. And what impact did we make? So again, we do research ahead of time.
You don't have to gamble. It's not a gamble, right? Yeah, put yourself in front of those coaches. Let them know you're interested. That goes a long way because a lot of athletes aren't doing that already. Even if you have a slightly off day, you already have communicated your interest to that coach. You provided some highlight tape so they know you're a little bit better than what you were on that day. I mean, you don't have to struggle so hard, right? Make the most out of those before. And then, again, you talk about this coachability aspect that we were just discussing. Follow up, say thank you, coach. Thank you for making the effort to come out to this showcase. I feel like I learned a lot. Hopefully you enjoyed what you saw out of me. I'm still very interested. Can we pick up a conversation when it's convenient for you? And just those pieces before and after are going to be far more impactful than anything that you do actually at the showcase. So just keep that in mind. That's communication that those coaches are looking for. Phil, I want to wrap it up here with this last one here. Suzanne coming back. Suzanne is a curious individual, which I appreciate. Yeah. What is the timeline from first contact to offer? What is the sequence of events that could happen? So we kind of touched on this earlier in the show, but if you take your scholarship offering schools, Division I, Division II, June 15th after your sophomore year is when I'm getting on the phone and I'm saying, look, we've known about you for over a year. We like what you're doing. I've checked out your NCSA recruiting profile. Here are our official visit dates, right? Here are the questions that I have for you. Are you interested in our program? So that conversation, those initial back and forth, is a lot of just relationship building, summer after sophomore year going into the junior year. Sometimes it can be accompanied by an unofficial visit to that campus. That might be next, whether it be from a hosted junior day through admissions departments, or just that coach hosting a junior day. Some athletic departments will do a junior day for athletes, so they have something a little bit more structured. But ultimately through conversations, gauging interest, learning more about the athlete and the athlete learning about my program, I am trying to get that athlete on campus. So maybe they take an unofficial visit, commit to an official visit, maybe later that junior year, the summer before their senior year, early on in senior year. But ultimately, everything is leading towards that official visit where these coaches are going to put forth their best showcase event. Say, hey, this is our athletic department. This is the team. This is what the team is about. This is what my coaching philosophy is about. This is what the academic side is going to look like. And just say, this is the package. This is what you're going to get when you come here. But those spots are coveted. And they are limited. I'm not offering that to everybody because it comes too much to juggle. And quite frankly, I need to know that an athlete is very serious about my program before I offer them that official visit, because that's money coming out of my recruiting budget. So, you talk about those official visits. If you set up 5 official visits at schools in which you are interested, potentially your top schools, you've done a great job with recruiting. Your senior year is the only time you can actually sign. And by that, I literally mean put pen to paper for a national letter of intent saying I intend to go to this school for at least the next year. I accept the terms of the scholarship. That period typically opens up for most sports in the middle of November of your senior year. And as a coach, if I've done my job as a recruiting coordinator, I'm pushing those out in the first week of that November signing period after those athletes have been on an official visit with me. So sophomore to senior year, and really early in your senior year, Phil, you're talking about like 14 to 18 months, and it moves at a pretty breakneck pace. It can, which is again why we so much suggest that everybody gets out ahead of this a little bit and takes care of business early on. Phil, I think it's time for some commitments. It's like my favorite part of the whole show. We're going to ring the bell. Again, that comes from in our offices. We have big bells that hang off the wall where we celebrate commitments as we learn about them. First and foremost, Alyssa Richter, who has a great story. Alyssa grew up in California. She grew up in San Jose, California. When she was a kid, she moved to Germany, and she's actually at the Munich International School as an American. So Alyssa, obviously a tennis player here who's committed to the University of Southern Mississippi, had to do this from abroad in a totally different time zone where she wasn't free to just visit any school whenever she wanted. So Alyssa fought the good fight and, engaged in this process early, took it step by step, and had to do this remotely. So Alyssa will be coming back here to the States from Munich to attend University of Southern Mississippi and play some tennis there. I just thought that was a cool story.
Very good. And that was actually a cool story. Love those international stories. Next up, we got Matthew Leal. Really good action shot coming from Matthew. Obviously a soccer player in that regard. And he's going to actually be going over again to Erskine College. Okay, Division II program there out of South Carolina. And obviously Matthew is pumped to be heading over. And obviously a really cool action shot kid. Looks way more athletic than myself. So a huge Matthew.
Well, good for him. Good. Yeah. Due West, South Carolina. I had to look it up, honestly. Conference Carolinas is where he's going to be next year. So last one here, Milo Suarez, obviously a baseball player. He is going to an Ivy League school, Dartmouth College. That is in Hanover, New Hampshire, right? Division I, Ivy League, obviously a smart kid, going to start very, very high level. As a reminder, no scholarships, no athletic scholarships at Ivy League, but those athletes tend to have a slightly different focus outside of their sport when they're ending up at an Ivy League school. So congratulations to those three. Again, we're dealing with athletes that were hit pretty hard by the pandemic, and in a time where they were attempting to have conversations with coaches in their junior and senior year, a lot of that got taken away from them, and they had to totally redirect. So for those three and the others that we, like to ring the bell for here on the program that have committed to schools, just congratulations. That's a feel good, and it took a lot of time. And, in a lot of cases, those athletes had started the recruiting process in their freshman, sophomore year, and then dealt with a lot of adversity and uncertainty throughout this. So, love giving those guys a shout out. Phil, always a pleasure catching up with you. Loved what we had to talk about here today. And, if you guys out there, watching have any questions about anything, please reach out to Phil and myself individually. We'd be happy to work with you. Phil, closing thoughts?
Absolutely, Danny. And again, certainly a pleasure to be here talking with the folks. And one thing I think, Danny, we don't think about all the time to close us out. Hey, somebody out there watching may be our next commit to shout out. So within that boat, everybody take heed, and we'll be right back next week to really go over some more exciting updates in the recruiting process.
No doubt. We'll see you guys next week, Tuesday, 2 p.m. Central. Thanks for being here. We'll see you guys again soon.